Now, I want to be clear. When I asked myself that question, I didn't mean it necessarily like what if Spider-Man was the main horror antagonist of the film. I meant it more in the sense of like just what if Spider-Man was in a horror film instead of, a fun, friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, I guess. And that's the question I asked myself. And a main inspiration from that was actually the TV show Once Upon a Time. The first three seasons of Once Upon a Time are some of the best television of all time, and the reason I love it so much is that it shows the expectation versus reality, in the sense of like we have our own image of these fairy tale characters, but the reality was very different. Not saying what we were told in the movies was fake, but what if it was an exaggeration of the truth, and there was much more of a shade of gray to all of them? That's what I wanted to do with Spider-Man, and just the general idea of like, I'll say this: one of the starting points of this series as a whole, actually, and a big influence on display was Once Upon a Time. The idea of like, oh hey, what if? What if Once Upon a Time was, instead of with fairy tale characters, it was with Marvel characters? Or what if instead of Marvel it was DC characters and so on? So, and I always thought that like Spider-Man, like if he existed in the real world, would be very different. Not in the sense that he's like a villain in a horror story, but more in the sense of his situation would be much more horror like than, fantasy like, I guess. And that was a big inspiration in terms of how I molded his character for my screenplay display. And yes, for those of you who are wondering, I have seen the horror Spider Man fan film The Spider. I highly recommend checking this out if you haven't seen it on YouTube. And yes, the short film I think can't help but have it be a little bit of an influence. But I also want to mention that if you haven't seen it, I will put a link to it in the description box below. But it's not a direct influence, like in the sense of I want to take that short film or the concept of a horror Spider-Man and that's it. This is going to be a totally different character, like I described in my other video. Thank you so much for watching, everybody, and I will see you all next time.